I like sporty hatchbacks like the Volkswagen Golf GTI because they're fun and functional. Unfortunately, they're also few and far between these days. And that makes this Kia Forte5 GT a bit of a surprising option, delivering most of the fun in a sleek and stylish package. Look, I'm not saying this Forte5 GT competes directly with the Volkswagen GTI, but it does come pretty damn close. It's another pseudo-sport compact car on the market, kind of like the Hyundai Elantra Sport and GT and the Toyota Corolla with the 2-liter engine under the hood. And what this thing lacks in outright performance, it more than makes up for with price. The cheapest Forte5 GT starts at just over $27,000, and the one I'm driving is the loaded model, but it only tops out at about 30 grand. That's cheap no matter how you slice it, but especially when you compare it to a GTI. Now, there is one caveat here in that the Forte5 GT is only offered with an automatic transmission, whereas the GTI is still offered with a 6-speed manual, the way a sport compact should be. On the flip side though, if you compare apples to apples and add the DCT to the GTI, this thing is thousands of dollars less. Now don't get me wrong, you do get what you pay for in a GTI, and there's a reason that is the sport compact car of sport compact cars, but if you're on a budget, this isn't a bad option. First and foremost, the Forte5 GT looks the business. It's really sleek, really stylish, and it's got some cool contrasting accents like the red in the grille and on these seats and the black on the bumpers and the mirror caps. It looks really good, and I'd say this is probably the most stylish hatchback you can buy today. I do wish Kia would spice up this cabin just a little bit more and maybe replace some of this silver on the dash with red, but that is a small bone to pick, and that's not really what you're paying for when you're buying a sporty hatchback like this. What you're paying for is the powertrain, and this thing has a pretty good one. Now, this is the fraternal twin of the Hyundai Elantra GT N-Line, so there's a 1.6-liter turbocharged motor under the hood, and it's a pretty good little power plant. It puts out 201 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque, so not quite the amount you get with something like the GTI, but it's more than enough. It's paired with a 7-speed DCT, and there are a few issues with it that I'll get to in a minute, but the pairing is pretty good, and it does a great job of sending all that torque to the front wheels in a hurry. It's just a really fun little hatchback to bomb around in. There's not a whole lot of turbo lag here. All that torque kicks in at about 1500 RPM, and you can really feel it surge forward when you get on the gas. It really likes it higher up in the rev range though, so keep that in mind. Now, there's also a drive mode selector that has a sport mode, and it amps up the throttle response and adds a little bit of weight to the steering. I do wish you could get this thing with a 6-speed manual like you can with that Elantra GT, but this thing is a great transmission for the most part. Some of the hiccups I noticed are that it shudders at lower RPMs, and it also tends to slip a bit right when you engage reverse. It just doesn't really catch right away, so when you hit the gas pedal, it doesn't go anywhere for a split second before it engages the gear you want. Again, this thing isn't quite as fast as a GTI, but honestly, you're not going to notice it when you bury your foot in that throttle pedal or when you're tossing it into a corner. This thing is very well balanced, very nimble, and very eager to push hard. It really likes to play, and I dig it a lot. It's got a very responsive chassis. Now, the steering is still pretty sterile even with that sport mode engaged, but the extra resistance you get just gives it a little bit more character. The really nice thing about the way this car handles is that there's a lot of leeway. There's tons of runway before it starts to understeer. You know that feeling when you're heading into a corner just a little bit too hot and it starts to plow to the outside of the corner instead of turning in? Well, there's a lot of room before you get to that point, and it is very agile. It's got that same underpinning that you get in the Elantra GT, and it really shows here. This thing has maybe even just a little bit more sportiness to it, and I like the way it drives. Now, there are a couple other things you get in a GTI that help make it a sport compact that you don't get here, like adaptive dampers or a limited slip differential, but this is a very capable car, and I'd love to get it out on an autocross course to see exactly what it can do. It's very engaging to drive, and like I said, it's got really nice throttle response, especially higher in the rev range. Once I have it in this sport mode, this thing will really take off, and I dig the way it drives and the way the power is delivered. There is a little bit of slop in the suspension that I'd like to see tidied up, but at the same time, that's what makes this a very comfortable car to cruise around in, and it does a really nice job of soaking up bumps, even with these 18-inch wheels and low-profile tires. The seats you get in the GT model are also really comfortable. Again, they're on the firm side, but they're nice and supportive, even on longer drives, and that's something that Kia hasn't exactly been known for. Some of their seats do give you fatigue over time, but they've really stepped up the game and improved them a great deal. Now, one beef I have is that this isn't real leather, it's synthetic, but it is easy to clean, and it looks great with the red piping and contrast stitching. The other thing is I'm driving a GT Limited model, so these seats are heated and ventilated up front and heated in the back, and so is the steering wheel. So there are some great comfort features for an affordable price. Kia also deserves some credit for the improvement in interior materials, and you could really feel it in this GT model. The dash is actually soft to the touch instead of hard plastics, though it's not perfect, and there still is just a little bit too much hard plastic. Take these A-pillars for example. They're very cheap, very hollow feeling, and they're really wide, so they're kind of difficult to look around. Especially when you're making a turn, you kind of have to crane your neck to see around them. But otherwise, there are some nice materials in this thing. Materials aside, this cabin is great for accommodating people and stuff. There's tons of room to stretch out, not quite enough headroom for a guy like me, but for the most part, there's enough room that you could fit 4 adults comfortably in here. I'm really impressed with how much room there is in the second row as well, and you could fit 2 adults in the back seat without too much complaining. The big thing the Forte 5 GT has going for it is that it's got some pretty fantastic styling. The GTI and Elantra DT are both pretty bland and boxy, but this thing is really sleek and almost has a sport back look to it. But the good news is it doesn't cut into any of the practicality, and there's tons of room behind the back seats or with them folded. The other thing is you can still fit 2 people in the back seats comfortably with the front seats all the way back, and I actually really like how this thing is packaged. I've got to say though, beyond just giving you a ton of room to work with, the Forte 5 GT is really well laid out and makes great use of the space. The way all the controls and dials are laid out are really nice, easy to use, and easy to read. Take this lower console. You've got controls for the drive mode as well as your heated seat and ventilation functions. Move up to the HVAC controls and its dials and buttons that are nice and big and easy to read. And then above that, you've got this 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system that has buttons that run along the bottom as well as knobs on either side for volume or tuning. Now let's talk about this infotainment system. Kia and Hyundai build a really great one, and that's the case here. No, it doesn't have much frill, but it is very easy to get accustomed to. It's also pretty responsive to touch, and I dig the way it's laid out. It's also got standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so you can hook your phone up and use your maps and music. The Forte 5 GT also comes with some pretty great advanced safety and driver assist technology like lane keep assist, automatic emergency braking, and blind spot monitoring. Since I'm driving the loaded version, it adds pedestrian detection function and adaptive cruise control, but I do have to say it's not the best system on the market, and I find it really fluctuates between accelerating and hitting the brakes out on the highway. It's also really slow to get back up to speed once you use this resume button, and it does keep a bit too wide of a gap between you and the vehicle in front of you, but most people won't find that an issue, and it's only because I've driven so many others on the market that I notice those little things. All in all, the Forte 5 GT comes together really nicely, and it's hard to argue with the package you get here, especially considering how well it performs. And that's been a bit of a hang-up with Kia over the years, that it delivers all the technology and features you want, but not quite the performance. But if you take a look at the Stinger GT that came before this, Kia has really stepped its game up. The other nice thing is this isn't just a badge-engineered Hyundai. If you look at some other brands, they just slap a badge on a vehicle and it looks the exact same as one of its sister products. This thing has some serious style and it stands on its own. It doesn't look like a Hyundai product at all, but it looks like a Kia. And it's got some serious style. Look at the Stinger GT and look at this thing. Kia has really stepped its game up lately, and it shows. To recap, I like the stylish design, the excellent ride and handling, and the punchy performance of this Kia Forte 5 GT. I don't like the synthetic leather upholstery in this top trim, the lack of interior character, or the fact you can't get it with a manual transmission. So the Forte 5 isn't quite the hot hatch that the Volkswagen GTI is, but there's an awful lot of bang for your buck here. It's a great car to drive and comes packed with some pretty decent features and technology. If you're after something sporty, stylish, and practical on a budget, the Forte 5 GT is definitely worth a look.